Shall we begin?
The one thing they love more than a hero is to see a hero fail, fall, die trying. In spite of everything you've done for them, eventually they will hate you.
Greetings, Sentients! So here we are with the final 2 episodes of Game of Thrones. And again, spoiler warning if you haven't seen the episode yet. But regardless, most of this episode is going to be about Daenerys, which we pretty much have like 2 to 3 seasons worth of character growth packed in for Daenerys in one episode. Needless to say, a lot of people are very disappointed. Again, it's one of those things. If you're a casual fantasy fan, just watching a show to be entertained, you'll probably like this episode well enough. Again, cinematography-wise, the way it's shot, the way it's directed, it's beautiful. We had some great shots, some great battle scenes, some great CGI, and there are some really tense, touching, and exciting moments in this episode. On the other hand, if you're someone who's invested in Game of Thrones, you are a fan of Game of Thrones, probably don't like this episode. It's not very good, especially by Game of Thrones standards. Now, a lot of people have said, well, the first 3 seasons are really the only good seasons for Game of Thrones, and it's been steadily downhill from there. That's a bit of a matter of opinion, but even if we accept that it's true, keep in mind that people that read the books say the exact same thing. The first couple of books are good, and then J.R.R. Martin just kind of loses his way after that, and the books go steadily downhill. So, to be honest, that would apparently just be Game of Thrones, and it's not really fair to put that just on the writers here. Laughingly referred to as D&D, because they're both of their first names start with D, and it's a reference to Dungeons & Dragons, which is well known for ruining other franchises. Believe me, I came up from Heroescape, and I know what D&D did to Heroescape, so it's no surprise that D&D would also do the similar to Game of Thrones, even though this is a different D&D. But needless to say, calling them D&D, it's not a compliment. Regardless, the setup for Daenerys in of itself isn't bad. The overall plot's not a bad idea. She's lost a second one of her dragons. She's lost her closest, longest friend and advisor, Missandei, or however you say her name. She's a name very similar to the Red Woman. Plus, she's figured out all on her own, somewhat implausibly, but, I mean, it's not impossible, that Jon Snow has betrayed her. That Jon told Sansa, Sansa told Tyrion, Tyrion told Viserys, the Spider, and now people are plotting her downfall. She's right on the money. The fact that she's so exact when she actually states this chain is the only thing that's a little bit iffy. Would have been nice, like, if she had said maybe this or maybe that, or Tyrion had maybe stepped in and said actually it was one of these, rather than her being able to guess it so perfectly. But regardless, doesn't really matter. So she's understandably upset, and Viserys the Spider does actively seem to be betraying her. The implication in the early scenes of this episode is that through the help of a little girl who works in the kitchens, he's trying to poison her. Daenerys, that is. But she's not eating, so that's not working. Now, when Jon finally arrives, literally the first thing the Spider does is try to recruit him to betray Daenerys, letting him know that he knows that he's really a Targaryen. I didn't think this was handled very well. First of all, they say the line, when a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin and Westeros holds its breath, meaning that they'll either land up sane or insane. Again, all the incest that goes on in the family does lead to birth defects and the like. They repeat that at the beginning of it as a kind of, what happened last time on Game of Thrones type of, spiel. Only to have 5 minutes later, Viserys quote that line word for word to Jon, without even waiting for Jon to enter the keep. He runs out, basically, and meets them on the shore, in full view of Tyrion and Daenerys. That kind of ends up going as you might expect, and Tyrion, in fact, throws the spider under the bus. A lot of people aren't going to like that, because Tyrion and the spider are, friends. That said, they're a bit more like, co-worker friends, I always felt, more than like really close personal friends. Although there is real friendship between them. But also, someone's got to be sacrificed, right? Jon betrayed Daenerys by telling Sansa. Sansa technically does owe her allegiance through Jon to Daenerys, and Sansa betrayed Daenerys to Tyrion. Tyrion then betrayed her to the spider, who is now actively trying to get Jon to betray her. Someone's got to pay for that, right? So who's going to pay for it? Well, to be honest, the most expendable man is the spider, regardless of any friendship. Jon is obviously too important, both plot-wise, but even to Daenerys. She's in love with him, and he is, at least in theory, a calming effect on her. Possibly the only person that could keep her from going, over the edge and going insane, assuming that is an option. Obviously, Sansa is wrapped up in that. If Daenerys kills Sansa, well, that's obviously going to be too much for Jon to handle. This is his sister, cousin technically, but he grew up with her. Sansa is his sister for all practical intents and purposes. So Sansa can't be killed. Obviously, Tyrion himself doesn't want to be killed. So who's left? Well, the spider. And sure enough, this ties in nicely with an earlier season's episode in which Daenerys warned the spider, should he ever betray her, she'd burn him alive. So she does. He's brought out and rather hurriedly executed off by the dragon. In an effort to give him some dignity, I guess, he goes out without a scream, burned alive by a dragon, not a peep from him. I guess that gives him some dignity to his death. So quiet dignity, literally. Comes off very unrealistic, however. I mean, no one is that stoic that being burned alive is something they can do quietly. Regardless, they get Daenerys to agree that she will accept a surrender from the King's Landing, the Lannisters, if the bells of the city ring. So she does agree to that. Interestingly enough, we don't really hear much from Grey Worm, the Unsullied commander, the entire time. He is there, but he really has barely any lines, and we don't get any insight into his character. Obviously, he must be hurting since he was in love with Missandei. He's just sort of there, though. There's no real commiserating over their shared loss or anything between the two of them. There's a token gesture, but that's all it feels, like kind of a token gesture. We never really get into Grey Worm's head, unfortunately. Anyway, you remember the last episode, where Euron Greyjoy managed to basically one-shot Daenerys' second dragon, and then pincushion it afterward. Well, now they've been calling them scorpion crossbows, despite the fact that they've got lions' heads on them and kraken tentacles. They may have been called scorpion in an earlier season, I don't know. They're not really referred to that much in this episode, but I think at the very end they referred to them as that. But to me, I think of them as kraken bows, or crossbows, because again, they got the kraken design with the Lannister lion thrown on the front, and they're mounted on all these ships. They're also mounted all over the city. But regardless, they've been nerfed. Daenerys does a dive bomb on her remaining dragon, Drogon, and wipes the entire fleet out. I don't think they even fired one of the crossbows. Could be wrong, but I don't recall them ever doing that. And considering how there's like a good, 75 to 100 ships out in that harbor, you'd think they would have had crossbows pointing in all directions and would have at least gotten a shot off at her. But no, Daenerys is playing on God mode. She destroys the entire fleet without effort, really. And then moves on to the city, which again, seems totally unprepared for her. Again, you'd think they would have had the scorpion crossbows pointing in all directions. After all, the wall does go all around the city. Plus, it's not like you can really hide a dragon flying around. Granted, the dive bomb, she comes up from the high skies, the sun behind her, okay, then maybe. But once she's burning the fleet, isn't the city aware of this? And then when she destroys the crossbows on that side, fine and well enough, but then she flies over the city to the other side where her army let them in. But, I mean, dragons don't teleport. They're decently fast flyers, but you would have thought they would have seen the dragon coming and at least be turning the crossbows around to point in that direction. But nope, the only clue we get is the leader of the Golden Company sort of hears her coming, but doesn't know what it is that's coming, and then the gate blows open and she destroys the crossbows. Cool scene, but doesn't really make any sense. And you don't really have any sense of difficulty. Daenerys is not in any danger. She wipes out half the Golden Company doing this. And then the charge of the Dothraki and the Unsullied, who are literally right behind the Dothraki, apparently can run as fast as a horse in armor, then slay the rest of the Golden Company. That's, other than a couple of stragglers, that's it for them. So much for them in the Iron Bank. Now, Jaime Lannister has also shown up along with the Hound and Aerys, but to be honest, most of this is just so irrelevant. Literally, the Hound and Aerys managed to waltz into the castle. I mean, no guard stops them, nothing. And maybe they cut a scene, but we don't see them kill anyone to get in the castle. Aerys doesn't use. And now, after having ridden, it's supposed to, I think, be a 2-week journey between Winterfell and King's Landing, now the Hound tells Arya that she shouldn't be here, that the Hound is basically going to throw his life away and for revenge, but she still has something she could live for. And she agrees and leaves. And it's like, what was the whole point of the trip? Why couldn't he tell her that in Winterfell? Or outside of King's Landing? I mean, he waits till now to say this? But regardless. Now, Jaime Lannister also arrives. He is actually captured by Daenerys, and Tyrion betrays Daenerys again to let him go free. We don't see any direct fallout from this. I'm not sure Daenerys actually knows by the time the episode's over. But regardless, so he goes to the city. He doesn't make it into the castle, however. But Tyrion had told him there is a way through the castle, all the way to the seashore, but King's Landing's kind of on this cliff face. But the stairs from King's Landing do in fact go all the way down to the seashore in a sort of hidden bay. So Jaime goes down, leaves the city, which he's able to still easily do, gets all the way down to the sea, to the bottom of that staircase, when he runs into the pirate Greyjoy, who not only has survived his fleet burning, but is washed up on shore, the only one, and on this exact spot, where he decides he needs to be the one to kill Jaime Lannister. Now, granted, Jaime's kind of a famous figure, the Kingslayer and all that, but he's way past his prime. The show is made quite clear since his hand has been cut off. And to be honest, he's also been kicked out of the Lannisters by Cersei, so he's really nobody at this point. In fact, him being up at Winterfell was pretty much pointless. He doesn't really do anything up there than any other, common soldier does. We basically just get the fan service of him and Brienne of Tarth together. Totally unrealistic, totally done to please the fans, and totally pointless since right afterwards he leaves, comes back here. Now, J.R.R. Martin does like to subvert tropes, and there's a lot of people keep asking, what about so-and-so prophecy? Well, the whole point of Game of Thrones is to show that prophecies aren't worth anything, that you shouldn't pay attention to prophecies. So if you still believe in prophecies at this point, you clearly haven't been watching the show. Even this version of A Song of Ice and Fire has made that clear. Prophecies are crap. Don't pay attention to prophecies. But regardless, one of the subversions that Martin has played around with is the redemption arc. Can someone truly be redeemed? And again, I don't know how he'll turn out in the books, but I guess more or less for Game of Thrones, the answer is no. So Huron and him have a rather lackluster fight that's not particularly good, which, to be honest, doesn't seem like a whole lot, especially given how Jaime Lannister is well past his prime now. On top of that, we're not actually sure that he does kill Jaime Lannister. Jaime has been stabbed multiple times, quite possibly could die from his wounds. But he lives for quite a long time afterwards with really few ill effects, managing to climb that vast staircase all the way up to the Red Keep, without any problems. Now here we get where everything goes downhill. There's been some light suggestion that Daenerys has some of her father's tendencies in her. Remember, he was called the Mad King. But they've only been so barely alluded to. Probably the only significant one was her dealing with the Sons of the Harpy back in Essos. That's probably the only significant mention of that, and she overcomes it easily. The only other significant reference is when she burns the noblemen who refuse to bow the knee to her. An unnecessary reaction, but at the same time, again, setting a new precedent. She's arrived. She's got to make an impression. It's such a fairly minor thing in the end. But here she's apparently gone over the deep ender, and she continues to burn the city anyway. In fact, she makes no effort to concentrate on military targets, nor does she immediately make a run towards the Red Keep. She just starts burning the town. just burning the buildings, burning the streets in between. I'm kind of surprised they don't show her lighting Dothraki and Unsullied on fire. Literally, she's just killing everyone and everything. And granted, she has lost quite a lot here. I mean, she's lost Ser Jorah, she's lost Missandei, she's lost 2 of her dragons, she's apparently lost Jon's love since she attempts to initiate some physical intimacy with him and he again pulls back. Plus Jon's betrayed her because he did tell Sansa. So Sansa's betrayed her, Tyrion's betrayed her, possibly twice, I'm not sure she knows about the second time yet. And of course, the spider betrayed her and she had to kill him. So granted, she's lost a lot. But none of this has been an instant reaction either. She's had time to process it. And it's not until she hears the bells that she then goes off and starts killing everyone. I mean, if this had happened when Missandei was killed or something, or had Jon just rejected her, she got on her dragon and then went out and killed, I mean, something. But instead, she's been calm, cool, collective, even stated her bloodlust destroying the Iron Fleet and the majority of the defenses and half the Golden Company. But nope, the bells go off and she starts massacring women and children. Granted, it's still somewhat impersonal because she's up in the air on a dragon, not down there seeing their faces. But regardless, I don't have a problem with Daenerys becoming the Mad Queen, but this is not handled well. Again, it's not a bad plot idea, but it's very poor writing. Regardless, she does eventually turn her attention to the Red Keep and starts destroying it. I don't know if she burns it to the ground completely or just burns up chunks of it. We don't really get a good aftershot. Cersei, who's in the Red Keep, of course, is moved out by the Mountain and Qyburn, or Claiborne. His name starts with a Q. I hear a lot of people pronounce it with a K sound, however, so I'm not quite sure. But he's her hand. They escort her out. And while they're descending the stairs, that part of the castle collapses on itself, and the Mountain literally uses his body to protect them. Right afterwards, the Hound shows up, and just like that, the Mountain is no longer loyal. And to be honest, a lot of people were looking forward to this fight. It's even rather stupidly referred to as the Plague Bowl or something idiotic like that. But regardless of what you call it, people have been looking forward to this fight. And also, I'm interested in how it would turn out. But the way it's done is just so poorly. I mean, just the sight of the Hound frees him from whatever control is over him. I mean, we just saw how much control they had over him, how loyal he was. And just like that, nope, he's fine now, I guess. I mean, he never talks. And to be honest, we don't necessarily know why he's that upset with... I know the Hound hates the Mountain, but does the Mountain really have that much reason to be upset with the Hound at this point? I'm not sure he does. And if he does, how come he never left to go hunt the Hound down? But regardless, he disobeys the Queen and then kills her hand. Both of them then let Cersei go down the stairs to get out of their fight because they don't care about her one way or the other now. And they get into a fight. And, I mean, the fight itself is fine, but it answers nothing. The helmet of the Mountain does get knocked off, and it looks like he's a spider. He looks like an ugly, undead version of Viserys. Makes no sense. Clearly he is undead. The Hound stabs him multiple times, including through the eye into the brain, and he's not dead. Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. He's clearly not related to the White Walkers, so is there other ways to make zombies in this world? You know, there's 2 methods? And how did this other guy stumble across this method? And why hasn't he done more than make 1? And I don't recall the Night King having trouble controlling his undead. I mean, is that what the Mountain is? Another proto-Night King? I mean, the Night King went rogue after all. I mean, I don't know. We're told nothing. In the end, the Hound kills him by bodily throwing both of them off the castle walkway, because the whole wall's been destroyed, and they fall into Dragon's fire burning at the bottom, and I assume the Mountain was killed by that. Certainly the fall should have scattered his body parts everywhere, and fire at least works on the White Walker undead type. Don't know if it works on this type or not. Cersei makes it to the bottom, where she's reunited with Jaime, who's, yeah, his wounds aren't bothering him, so much for... I mean, he's bleeding still, but he's not been killed. And on top of that, he takes Cersei, and they walk halfway back down. Now, in of itself, this is somewhat of a touching scene. Second she sees Jaime, she's like so relieved, so happy to see him, that despite how they parted last season, it's kind of a touching episode spot. But regardless, they get about halfway down, find out that the tunnels have collapsed. and they just stay there holding each other until the rest of the castle collapses on top of them. I guess it's subversive, but I mean, no one's ever going to know for sure that Cersei is dead now. There is no way, with their medieval technology, they are going to pull that rubble aside in time to find her body intact enough, assuming it is intact enough, to identify her. So there's always going to be rumors and stories that Cersei got away and is out there somewhere. I mean, on one note, relationship-wise, it's a touching way for her and Jaime to go. But on the other hand, it's very unsatisfying. Now, when Daenerys snapped, I forgot to mention, that's also the cue for the Unsullied to do the same. Grey Worm, even though the Lannisters had actually started surrendering when the bell, I think even before the bell was tolling, they were throwing down their weapons, he starts killing them, the other Unsullied jump in, and then the Northerners jump in. And later we see Dothraki riding their horses through, and they're also killing people. Which, again, with them makes no isn't that big of a surprise. That's kind of the Dothraki anyway. But it makes less sense for the Unsullied, even if we can excuse Grey Worm, the other Unsullied jumping in. Again, there's no hesitation on their part. No surprise. And the Northerners, Jon has no control over them. In fact, he's even forced to kill one of his own men to keep him from assaulting and raping one of the women of King's Landing. So I think definitely Jon's eyes have been opened, and I suspect what the final episode is going to be is Jon versus Daenerys. Whether that will be an epic battle, or a personal fight between them, or a series of betrayals, I don't know. It's possible some people think Jon will just go back to the north. He'll just abandon Westeros and go live among the wildlings, or at least try. I don't know if Sansa will be pulled back in, but basically, I think that's what the fight's going to come down to, the Starks versus the Targaryens. So I guess Daenerys is the final boss. Which, again, Cersei did not go out like she was the final boss. Which is partly appropriate because, yeah, she's not. The Night King was. So, I don't know if this is meant to be subversive. Which, again, Martin likes in his book. So D&D are actually staying true to that. Although through a lot poorer writing. Supposedly they're going on to in fact write the next Star Wars trilogy, and I guess they're signaling to Disney that they can be the next Rian Johnson, which is not what anyone is looking for, and hopefully Disney isn't either. So I don't have a lot of hope here for Star Wars in this case, and this is where it's, again, I can't even get excited about the new Star Wars movie coming out. Saw the trailer, but it's all just so much meh. It's not possible to get hyped up for Star Wars right now. And if these guys are taking over, that's not looking good either. Now, it's like 3 years out before the next Star Wars movie, so maybe these guys will mature and stop trying to be, you know, teenage edgelords like Rian Johnson. But I'm not confident about that. I mean, even though the movie is 3 years out, they start writing it a lot sooner than that. So if they start writing the way they're writing now, it's a disappointing time right now. Whether you're a Star Trek fan, a Star Wars fan, a Doctor Who fan, a Game of Thrones fan, it kind of feels like everything's just being torn down. Even the Marvel movies are starting to go off in this direction. And while a lot of people say, you know, Aquaman and Shazam was at least a step up for the DC universe, I did actually recently watch the Shazam movie, and I'll agree to step up, but it's still clear that they don't know where they're stepping to. I don't say that's definitely nothing that will have resurrected the DCU. So, it's just a disappointing time all around right now. I hate to end on a depressing note. We still got one more episode for Game of Thrones. I'm certainly still going to watch it. Maybe it'll redeem the whole season, but, you know, to be honest, if I was HBO, after this episode, I would scrap everything that was done and redo the final season. There's really no reason they can't do that. I'm sure they won't. There are TV shows that have done this, that will ignore an entire season and redo things. It has been done. It's not really for a major American TV show, certainly, which is why I don't expect it, because, again, no one wants to admit that they're wrong. But if I was HBO, I would take a look at this and say, no, we owe it to redo this. Scrap it all and redo it. Literally reshoot this episode. Don't make it a short 6 episodes, and do it properly this time. After all, I think even with how bad it is, it's not like Game of Thrones wouldn't sell. Especially if you told people that you had heard their complaints and you're going to do better. They'd make money doing it, but they won't. Until next week, my friends, thanks for listening.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shore of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10 hours of